we protect them so much from any kind of failure or any kind of discomfort that they don't have the opportunity to experience things that are difficult and know that, they can fail, they can make a mistake, and they will be okay.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 195. Today, we're talking about mindful family living with Kristen Race. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Fields, Mindful Mama Mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting membership, and I'm the author of the upcoming new book, Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome back to the Mindful Mama podcast. I am so glad you're here. I am so excited for you to be part of this conversation today. I know you're going to get so much out of it, and I'm just happy to talk to you and be here with you. In just a moment, I'm going to be sitting down with Dr. Kristen Race, and she is founder of Mindful Life and author of Mindful Parenting. Her programs are rooted in neuroscience and help adults and children build resilience to modern day stress. So this episode is all about how to build up resiliency to stress from both the inside out and the outside in. Kristen and I talk about how we can make small shifts to make profound changes. And some of the things I really want you to listen for are that, setting up an ideal life from the outside doesn't work. That actually our resilience really has to come from within. And that our stress as parents is contagious and it can really lead to stressed out kids. So it's important that you work on this. And that we can mentally create more space in our days. So this is a really hopeful episode. It's going to be very valuable to you, I know. So before we dive in, I just want to invite you to please leave your voice. I would love to hear your voice. Leave your feedback and your takeaways and your ahas from listening to the Mindful Mama podcast at mindfulmamapodcast.com. I would love to have your voice in the 200th episode. It's coming up. So please, please, please help me celebrate for the 200th episode by leaving your voice in a voicemail. So you just go to mindfulmamapodcast.com. It's super easy. You just click the link and leave a voicemail. It is so easy. So please take a moment, do it. I've even put the link in the notes that you can access from the podcast listener on your phone. So no excuses. Just take a minute wherever you are. Let me know how this podcast has affected you. It would make a profound difference. And I want to let you know that Raising Good Humans is available for pre-sale. Yay! You can pre-order it now at raisinggoodhumansbook.com. There's a couple places to do so. And when you do, you can get some awesome book bonuses, including Chapter 1 in audio, this masterclass of speakers that has been incredibly popular that includes Dr. Laura Markham, that's available as a book bonus. And if you buy 3 or more copies, you can get a shout out on this podcast. So please go ahead and do so at raisinggoodhumansbook.com. And now join me at the table as I talk to Kristen Race. Kristen, thanks so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Hunter. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you. I'm so excited to talk to you. You wrote the book, Mindful Parenting, and I teach a class, Mindful Parenting. So we're in this world together. And I love your book. I love the work that you're doing. And I was wondering if you would start us all off to tell us about this journey, starting us all off, telling us what happened 2 months after your son, Charlie, was born.
Sure. And In some respects, that feels so long ago. And at the same time, it feels just like yesterday. But I think to make sense of the story, I should start maybe a couple months before Charlie was born, just to give you a little bit perspective of what was going on in my life. I had a toddler, an 18-month-old daughter. I was working full time in a school as a director of counseling services. I was writing my dissertation and desperately trying to finish it before my son Charlie was born. And then for some reason, we also decided that this would be a great year to remodel our house.
Oh my God.
So there was a lot going on during that pregnancy. And I was very much in that mindset of, I can do anything if I put my mind to it. I just need to put my head down and, and charge through. And after Charlie was born, I had a C-section with him, and I just didn't, my body was not recovering from the C-section, and I was fatigued and I had joint pain and I was exhausted beyond what it felt like should be for a new mom, and started going to doctors to try and figure out exactly what was going on. And we went through everything from its postpartum depression to its lupus, its rheumatoid arthritis, its fibromyalgia. I went through endless doctor's appointments and tests and trying to figure out exactly what was going on. And this actually went on for about 2 years until I ultimately received a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease that my doctors felt pretty strongly was likely triggered by stress. And here I was in the midst of my, writing my dissertation about the neurology of stress and completely was not taking care of myself in any way, shape, or form. And it caught up to me and caught up to my health. And it was a real eye opener for me that it couldn't always be, mind over matter, that living in this constant state of, fight or flight was going to have some profound effects. And I knew it intellectually, but I never thought that it would really get to me physically until it really did.
Huh. It's amazing how we can kind of fool ourselves that this can happen to all these other people, but I'll be fine with all of those things going on. What did they tell you to do? What was the remedy for your diagnosis?
Well, it was, certainly there was medication involved, but it also, triggered a lot of life changes that ultimately led to the me founding Mindful Life. But initially, my thought was, you know what, we're going to move out of this city. We will move to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, which is where I live now. It's this small, little, blissful town. I won't be working so much. And I thought I really could set up this ideal life from the outside and kind of put a bubble around myself and my family from all of these stressors. But it didn't take long after making that move and setting up this new life and finding the right house and the right schools and getting the right job and, feeling like I had all the right things in place to really start to recognize that you can't protect yourself from stressors from the outside. That resilience has to come from within. And so that really was the big aha moment for me. And I was doing some work in schools at the time as a consultant, and I was seeing these really significant stress levels in kids, and really young kids, that had concerned me. And I'd seen the same thing in Denver as well. And so I started thinking about what was building resilience for me. And for me, that was my mindfulness practice. That was my yoga practice. So I started experimenting with these practices with kids in schools. And that ultimately led to the writing of the book, the founding of Mindful Life, my work in schools, and, everything that has occurred since. I call myself an entrepreneur by accident. I really thought I was going to move to the mountains and work a couple days a week and maybe have a private practice. And it all just kind of snowballed into this work of passion and around what I was seeing in the world around me and what was working for me and for my family.
That's so beautiful. I love the mission-driven work because it just comes out of your life and seeing the power of these practices and these solutions to lower that stress. And stress is an incredible epidemic, even since in the 6 years since you wrote your book, and it's even gotten worse for kids. I mean, I'm sure you could tell me
Oh,
more
yeah.
about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was just seeing it was definitely starting to rise when my kids were young. And I noticed it most in these, kindergarten age kids. And I would talk to their teachers and they would say, this is the most stressed group of kids we've had coming into kindergarten over the course since I've seen over the course of my career. And these were, veteran teachers that had been teaching for 20 years. And so I really wanted to figure out what's going on with these kids and the way we're raising these kids. And what I came to was that it wasn't as much the kids, but it was the parents,
Mm.
and that's where I kind of coined the term generation stress, which refers to a generation of stressed out parents raising a generation of stressed out kids. And we know that our stress is contagious, right? We have these mirror neurons in our brains that reflect the emotions we see witnessed around us. And as adults, as we've become more stressed and trying to cope in a much more hectic, busy 24/7 world, even in our best efforts to hide that from our kids, it trickles down. And, my work started working just with students and trying to give them skills to build resilience. And that was great. And that worked really well. And they soaked in these mindfulness practices almost as if they were learning a language at a young age. But what was really interesting was when I conducted our first study on our schools program. And one of the things that came out of the work, in addition to kids seeing an increase in their attention and emotional regulation and problem solving, is the teachers noted a significant difference in their stress level as they practiced with the kids. And so that kind of reiterated for me this need to focus on the whole system. And so we shifted our schools program to focus as much on teacher wellness as it did on student wellness, because teacher wellness had a profound impact on the classroom. And it also, really triggered me to think about how we can support parents and help them build resilience. And so the evolution of the work was it started in schools, working with schools and teachers, and then I wrote the parenting book
Mm-hmm.
as a way to kind of support that system.
Yeah.
And then that just really snowballed into, I went on a book tour and I started giving talks to all these parent communities. And after giving talks to parent communities, I would have people come up to me and say, hey, can you speak to my law firm? Can you come speak to my medical practice? And it just was so clear that there was this epidemic of kind of rising stress that people didn't know what to do with. And that's how my work has really evolved over the last 10, 12 years of doing this.
Yeah, I mean, we're so interconnected. I love that you could just connect these dots and see all these pieces, because we think that, I mean, especially many parents, we think, oh, if we can just fix our kids, then we'll feel better, or if we think, if we can get them to do some mindfulness in their schools and give them some of these practices, then it'll all be fine. But it really always does point back to us in that, we have to live what we want our kids to learn, and that modeling is so powerful. And what you said is our stress is contagious. And I think that we try to fool ourselves and say that it's not affecting our kids, that, I can be a mess and it's going to be fine. But you're hearing it here from
Yeah.
Kristen that it's not true. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in the stressed brain, and then how does mindfulness and meditation specifically work on the brain? This episode is sponsored by Candlewick Press, publisher of You Are Light, the latest title from children's book author and illustrator Aaron Becker. You open this book to find a graphic yellow sun surrounded by a halo of bright die-cut transparent circles. And then you hold the pages up to the light and enjoy the transformation as the colors in those circles glow. Aaron Becker follows as light reflects off the earth to warm our faces, draws up the sea to make rain, feeds all things that grow, and helps to create all the brilliant wonders of the world, including ourselves. You Are Light is about finding the light within each and every one of us. For kids, it gently introduces the concepts of colors, mindfulness, the environment, ecology, and the interconnectedness of our own lives with nature. For adults, You Are Light makes a perfect holiday gift that serves as a luminous remedy for any seasonal winter blues. You Are Light by Aaron Becker, available everywhere books are sold, and I highly, highly recommend it. It is a gorgeous book that I cannot wait to put in little hands this season.
Sure. So essentially, we take in information through our senses, and it goes to the thalamus part of our brain. And if that part of our brain perceives that information as unfamiliar or as threatening in some way, it sends a signal to the amygdala. And this is the part of our brain that activates that fight, flight, or freeze response. It's, responsible for our survival mechanisms. It makes our heart pound quickly, our breathing becomes quick and shallow, our muscles tighten, and our senses sharpen. And it was designed as a way to protect us. And when it works properly, it helps us to stay focused, to stay energetic, and to stay alert. And that same message also eventually gets to the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of our brain, it's a really important part of our brain, responsible for things like attention, impulse control, problem solving, forward thinking. It's the rational part of our brain. It allows us to think clearly. It allows us to learn and work effectively and efficiently. Now, the issue is that alarm part of our brain, that amygdala, reacts faster and at times can be stronger than the smart part of our brain. So essentially, when that alarm is triggered, the smart part of our brain shuts down. That part of our brain responsible for engaging effectively with the people around us, for paying attention, for solving the problems, that shuts down, and we rely totally on the survival mechanisms. And while we don't have the same threats to our survival that we did hundreds of years ago, or thousands of years ago, we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers or, being just having those kinds of threats. Our brain still is on high alert for things that it thinks threaten our survival. And these are all kinds of things. It could be, being late for school can trigger that response. Being late for a meeting, running into traffic, seeing a text come in on your smartphone from a coworker, seeing a problem at work. Your coffee spilling, your kids not wanting to go to school in the morning or not wanting to put their shoes on or dragging their feet as they're going out the door. All of these things trigger these mini stress responses in our brain and stimulate that alarm part of our brain. So as a result, we tend to react more impulsively. We have a harder time solving problems. We don't communicate as effectively. The good news is that through mindfulness practices, we can strengthen our prefrontal cortex, that smart part of our brain. And we do this in the same way we make changes in our body. So in the same way that you might use bicep curls to strengthen muscles in your upper arms, you can use simple mindfulness practices to strengthen those neural pathways in our prefrontal cortex. And when we can stimulate that part of our brain and keep that part of our brain more active, we not only build resilience to that stress response, but we're more engaged in the present moment, more engaged with our kids and the people around us. We tend to let those little stressors bounce off of us rather than letting them kind of fully impact our nervous systems. And that our sense of peace and calm and ease trickles down to our kids as well. So there's a lot kind of that goes into it, but that's kind of the I would say the 2-minute science lesson on what's going on neurologically.
So some people may look at that and say, okay, so I have this incredibly busy life. I am, working a job while I'm pregnant and remodeling my house.
Yes.
So it feels like mindfulness meditation can feel like another thing to do, and especially because in the beginning it's so challenging to start. It's challenging to get started and to kind of get in a groove with the meditation practice. So what do you say to people who are in that position of just they're in the thick of so much to do already that it feels overwhelming, feels like another thing to do?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about working with busy moms, because I am all about integrating mindfulness into what you already do. So we are so busy and so overwhelmed, but when we can integrate mindfulness into the context of our day, then it actually creates more space in our day, because mentally we don't get so caught up in all of the negative opportunities that the day offers. So things like, worry is a huge thing that can be consuming. Getting caught up in negative thoughts about or worries about our kids, about our future, regrets about the past. And as we start to practice mindfulness, we become more aware of these stress responses as they're occurring, and we can engage in simple things that are going to cut them off, that are going to bring our prefrontal cortex back online.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things you can do throughout the day that don't take much time, but really create space in your day so that you proceed through your day much more effectively, efficiently, without being in that heightened state of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, I found exactly the same thing, that it feels like there's something else to do, but it's sort of a weird practice that kind of gives you more time
It
in a
does.
strange way. Because I mean, it's amazing. Like for myself, after like being meditating regularly for 14 years, it's I when I'm mostly when I'm doing when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids, and when I'm
Mhm.
for a large part. And I think it makes me so much more efficient in all of the things that I do, just to be more present.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny. I was recently reading an article, and it was talking about how we we actually, this, I'll tell you what the article said, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. It said we actually aren't busier than we were 20 years ago. It's just that our brain has no downtime. So we feel this constant state of busyness, and meaning every second of downtime we have is spent checking our phones or checking our emails or doing something to engage or distract ourselves, versus just letting ourselves have a moment to look around. So
That downtime, that like waiting in line time, that pause, those were these sort of natural pauses that we used to have in our
yes.
life when our phones were attached to the walls.
Absolutely. When our phones were attached to the walls and our computers were attached to the desk at our office.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I think what also is interesting about that is the time that we are working, we're so much more distracted that we don't get as much done at work, because we're constantly multitasking. We're, bouncing back and forth between emails and projects and conversations, which is very an inefficient way to work. So because of that, we end up having more to do after we get home, because we've been so efficient and distracted during our days. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the 6 years since you wrote the book, the problems with media have only gotten worse, and the changes since then. Do you see any sort of new solutions? Because you talk a lot about simplifying as well in the book, because you talk about, very much about that inner response. Like we have to that resilience has to come from the inside, and that's a big piece of it. But there's a lot of the outside pieces that contribute and add to those stressors, and media kind of being one of them. What are some of the ways that you see in today's world that we can reduce that distraction level?
Yeah, and it's definitely, I think, a combination, right, of what we're doing internally and then also setting up our external lives to support what we want to do internally. And so for me, it's creating a lot of what I call little airplane modes. And airplane mode is simply, it can be used at work or at home. And I'll tell you how I use it at work first is I put my phone in airplane mode. My computer is set so I have no pop-up notifications, so I don't get those little bubbles when emails or things come through. And that time is spent working on my number one priority. So it's a chunk of time. For me, it could be 90 minutes. For some people, it's 30 minutes. But it's a time just to get that number one priority accomplished. And it's amazing how efficient and productive you can be when you don't have those pop-ups coming from your phone, from your computer. I even let my team know it's on my calendar when I'm in airplane mode, so they know, if at all possible, not to distract me. Now, airplane mode is also really important at home. So when I talk to working moms, I talk about when you get home from work, can that first 30 minutes be in airplane mode? Essentially, can you put your phone somewhere and can you take 30 minutes of time to really engage wholeheartedly with your family without those distractions? And that airplane mode may be during dinner time. Can you take that hour during dinner where everybody's phones and all of those things are put away? But it's just carving out. I'm not saying, that we don't ever use our phones and technology is not going away, but can we carve out some little windows just to give our brains a break from those constant distractions?
Yeah.
So for us, it's as a family, I have teens now, so everybody has phones. So it's a time for everybody to put their phones away, to go take a walk with the dog or to have a family dinner if we can manage that. But just to have some time without that kind of distraction is really important for the ways our brains function best.
Yeah. And I love that idea of the first 30 minutes when you get home, because your children want to connect with you. You want to connect with your house. You want to be present. You want to reset. I think that's a really beautiful idea. And it really is about kind of creating these healthy boundaries around this technology, which we're really starting to see has all these problems and things associated with them. So now you started to discover this impact of this stress on yourself. And of course, in others, when your kids were really little.
Yes.
And you started to, of course, explore it in your book. And you also write in the book about this. And I would love for you to just talk a little bit about this piece as well, maybe, and also about how the family, has evolved for you personally. But I would love for you to talk a little bit, Kristen, about the piece of the myth of, but I turned out okay. So we hear that a lot, right? Like, I was like, whatever, but I turned out okay. Why is that a myth?
I think it's a really interesting question. And it's one I haven't thought about in a while. Can you give me a little bit more of the context with which you're thinking about that question?
Well, I was thinking about, like, when we think, let's bring it back to media, right? Like the myth, like when I was a kid, I got home from school and I know I turned on the TV and I watched Three's Company and some lame shows. And I actually, I probably had like a lot of screen time as a kid because both my parents worked. And so I was out in the neighborhood too, but I had a lot of screen time. And someone might look at that and say, but I turned out okay. What's wrong with, giving the 18-month-old their own screen and having plenty of screen time in this day and age, in this context?
Thank you. So thank you for that. That triggered it all for me. You're right. I came home, same thing. Three's Company was one of my favorites. But I think there's a few things that are very different. One is that it's that you came home and you were in your living room and you were turning on the TV. Now think about all of sadly the moms you see walking strollers through the park and their kids have, the 18-month-old has a cell phone in their hand. So it's that constant accessibility, which is significantly changing the amount of time that kids are on screens. I think one of the studies I reference in my book, and I'm sure it's increased since then, is that kids get 7 hours and I think 53 minutes of screen time a day. So as much as we thought that we had screen time, it was nothing close to that. And a lot of that is what occurs in schools, right? Where they're using iPads and computers, but also a significant amount of time after school. And then when you add on the time that they're using multiple screens, so maybe they're on their phone and their iPad at the same time, it averages like 10 plus hours a day. So there's the pure volume of your brain constantly being in a reactive mode, responding to what is coming in through your senses, versus a more creative mode, which is what we get out of free play. So when you think about when you were young and you went outside and you found a couple friends and you said, hey, let's do this, or let's play this game, or, we're generating that ourselves. Our brain is being allowed to explore and create and really develop that prefrontal cortex, that incredibly important part of our brain that we need to learn effectively, to communicate effectively. And when we're just reacting to external stimulation coming in, and that both comes in terms of stimulation of our media and our screens. In many ways, it's also in terms of we have our kids in so many structured activities where all of the rules and the directions come from the adults. Kids aren't generating those rules like they do in free play. So the combination of all of those things, kids get an hour less free time than they did when we were growing up. So all of those things change the way our brains develop, and these kids' brains are developing. So they're growing up in a time where those alarm centers of their brain are being stimulated far more frequently than when we grew up. And that's why we're seeing this huge increase in anxiety rates for kids, in depression for kids. And so the good news is that it doesn't mean that we need to get rid of everything that we're doing, but we need to be more intentional about how their prefrontal cortex is developing and how we can, integrate programs into our schools and into our parenting that's going to allow that to occur, to create a bit more balance for them, given the environment that they're growing up in.
And it's so tough today too, because, you were talking about working parents, right? Like it's hard because, I mean, the structures in society and things like that, but what do you do with kids? They kind of have to be in a structured activity if you're, you don't have the ability to be home with your kids, have your partner be home with your kids or whatnot. And, but part of this is kind of what I'm hearing you say is that we need to be a lot more intentional about not only giving them some free space and some time that is not structured, that is time for free play, all of those things, but also giving ourselves some unstructured time, some back in 100 some non-technology time too. And all of this really goes back to that internal work of the mindfulness of, noticing what it feels like, maybe to then even want the distraction, to crave the distraction, and to practice being the change that we want to see, practice to engage in some of the other activities we did maybe before we had these distraction portals in our pockets.
Right. And I think there's such a cultural push on parents too. It's like, oh my gosh, if I don't have my child in a structured after school activity every day of the week, starting in first grade, then they're not going to get into college or, we
It's
feel, or
true.
they're going to fall behind and they won't be able to play soccer next year, or, all of those kind of fears that are placed on us as parents. And yeah, I talk to parents about having, until kids are 10 years old, they need a day or two after school of downtime. And whether that's in maybe that's in an after school program that allows for that unstructured play. If you're not home when they get home after school, or maybe it's having a caregiver there that takes them to the park or kind of facilitates that unstructured play, or maybe it's trading with another parent in your neighborhood who has kind of similar beliefs that you can kind of take kids back and forth that way. But the reality is the time that we want them really busy and active after school is around 12, 13, approaching those middle school, high school years. That's when we want them engaged and busy and passionate about their sport or their dance or their, whatever that their instrument, whatever that passion might be. And one of the things we're seeing with kids is we're cramming so much on them in terms of their scheduling and their training early that they're totally burnt out at 14 or 15 and they want to quit. And so that's the time we want them busier and more active. So they need that downtime. You're right, in the same way that we do.
That makes sense. I think back to my own unstructured 14-year-old years, and I probably could have used a little more structure, I think.
Right.
I could have used
a
little
right.
more structure. So you talk about, and that really goes into what you talk about in your book, the lost art of hanging out. And it's interesting because we talk about this here on the Mindful Mama podcast. And dear listener, if you've been listening a while, you know that we talk about this, but I think sometimes it's really kind of in a lot of ways kind of up to us to start to push back. And if we can't create that time, like to maybe start to hold it as a North Star and say, when I have a choice point, if I can choose towards for my younger kids some more unstructured time, then that's what I'm going to do, just to kind of hold that as like kind of a guiding principle. So you also talk though about cultivating good stress. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there's somewhat, there's the idea that we need some stress to motivate us and that we perform well under stress. And that is true. We do need a little bit to kind of get us going. And I think what's happened is sometimes we protect our kids. We protect them so much from any kind of failure or any kind of discomfort that they don't have the opportunity to experience things that are difficult and know that, they can fail, they can make a mistake, and they will be okay. They will recover. It's not the end of the world. And so what's happening as these kids grow up, it's, kind of that mentality of every kid needs to get a ribbon. So we give every kid a ribbon and they never learn what it's like not to get a ribbon or not to earn that ribbon. Mm-hmm. And so then when they do experience a failure, in high school or in college or even older, it feels catastrophic because they haven't built any of those tools of resilience. And so I talk a lot to parents about, the value of failure and encouraging your kids to take risks and asking them simple questions like, what mistake did you learn from today? Super simple question, but really reframes the idea that mistakes are to be learned from. They're not to be avoided at all costs for risks of feeling like a failure. We do in our family, we have these family adventures that we do it used to be every season. And now as my kids have gotten older or busier, it's usually we do one in the summer and one in the winter. But it's this push. It's really pushing ourselves outside our comfort zone and trying something new. So when the kids were younger, it would be a hike that we would do. Or for me, it was going to an amusement park with them. As a family, we decided, I lost the vote on that one. That's why we ended up at the amusement park. But it's a lot of it is it's a bike ride. It's an event that we participate in, like a 10K or something like that. And so it's kind of looking at those opportunities to really push ourselves and to feel that good stress, because there are good kinds of stress as well. And we almost have gone to the extreme of protecting our kids in so many ways, from the bad teacher, from, the difficult kid in their classroom, from getting cut from the soccer team, from coming in fifth place or whatever it might be. Those are all experiences that kids can learn from and are really going to help them build resilience.
Mm.
There's a great video on YouTube called "If You Haven't Failed, You Haven't Lived."
Mm.
And it's just a 2-minute video, and it talks about different people, from Michael Jordan to Lucille Ball to Walt Disney to Abraham Lincoln. And it talks about the failures that they experienced. And if they hadn't persisted, then they would not be, the amazing people that they ended up to be. So it's a great one to show your kids as well, and have a little discussion about.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to use that as our pre-movie night short next
There you go. I love it.
Next family movie night. So all this learning that you've done and you've been sharing, like, this has obviously shaped your own family. I guess it may be hard to tease out because you've only had the one experience with your, you only have the one life, right? So you don't have an opposite one to sort of compare to. But I'm just curious about, as far as your own life, all this learning about the brain, stress in the brain, and mindfulness, and simplifying, cultivating good stress, all of these things. What are some of the ways it's shaped your family?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's a few answers. I think some of the rituals that we started when our kids were young, around gratitude, have profoundly shaped my family and my kids. Starting when they were little, we would have a gratitude jar on the table, and we would write down things we were grateful for and stick them in the jar. And about once a week, we would pull out what people had written and share. We started a ritual of, whenever it was somebody's birthday, we go around and we would talk about what we appreciate about that person. And I think that has given my kids really the ability to recognize and appreciate things in their life in a way that I see is different than some of the other kids, some kids that I work with or schools that I work in, where that can be really difficult for kids just because they've never practiced it. So I think that has been a profound impact. It's interesting with the mindfulness stuff. I think when your mom is a quote unquote mindfulness expert, I hate the term expert, but you don't necessarily want to learn the practice of mindfulness from your parent.
I so hear you on this, Kristen.
I bet you do. The beauty of that was that the schools that my kids went to were trained in my mindfulness program.
Nice.
So they were able to receive those skills through just by going to school. It was something that they practiced every day in different classrooms. And so they were able to receive a lot of the mindful listening and mindful breathing and all of those compassion practices at school. And I see them using them. My son was a ski jumper for a long time. And so he would definitely be using breathing practices before his ski jumps. They definitely bring it into their soccer games and their approach to different competitions and to tests. So I see them kind of naturally using those in a way that luckily I didn't have to teach. And I think we all really value time without technology. They, I think, have a pretty good, they're teens, they have cell phones, they have Instagram accounts, they have all those things, but they do a pretty good job of knowing when is an appropriate and not appropriate time to be on their phones. and
Mm-hmm.
when they need to be engaged in person with people around them, versus having that phone as a constant default. So I think there's definitely been some benefits to them growing up the way that they did. Some came directly from me and some came very indirectly from me. And we'll see, there's still a lot of growing up to do. So
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
see how it goes, but it's definitely been huge in supporting us.
We'll have to get together in like 20 years and share notes, Kristen, about what happened with our kids
Right.
with
Right.
mindfulness.
I would say my one piece of advice to you, Hunter, is that have somebody else teach them the mindfulness.
I know. I've kind of been like, so do you want me to teach you meditation? And they're like, no. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
all right, I just back off.
So I just stick to the modeling piece.
Yeah.
I very much stick to the modeling piece of how I use technology, how I practice mindfulness, what my morning meditation looks like. And sometimes they'll wake up and they'll come sit next to me. Not so much anymore because they like to sleep late, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think the modeling piece is big.
I've noticed my 12-year-old, we had some friends over the other night. We had a campfire and roasted some s'mores, and my 12-year-old was saying that two of her friends, they were all sitting on the hammock, and two of their friends had their phones out, and how annoying it was. I was like, yes, okay, she thinks that's annoying. But then I thought maybe I can do something about that. When we have a gathering, I should have a phone box or something, like just encourage all of us to like put our phones in and disconnect, and encourage the kids to do that.
Yeah.
So she can connect with her friends.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times there's been a gathering and I'll look outside and there'll be four of them sitting on a deck and a beautiful view and of the mountains, and all four of them have their heads down on their phones. And yeah, it takes some prodding, I think, because that's their natural reaction, is just to go there. And so just trying to create some awareness around that and some different habits can be really helpful.
Yeah. So do you feel seeing that and doing the work that you're doing and have been doing for a while, and kind of seeing the way things, I mean, this is sort of, I'm sure you can't answer this, but are you feeling hopeful about the future? Or do you feel discouraged sometimes seeing the people walking with their heads down constantly?
I am feeling very hopeful. And part of it is just kind of the way my career evolved. When I started in this work, I felt like it was me and maybe 5 other people that were looking at how we teach kids mindfulness. And the mindfulness movement has grown exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in response to the need. And people are recognizing the way they feel. They're recognizing, what their kids are doing and how their kids are growing up, and they want to do something about it. And so I think the balance is not to come in and say, well, the only way to fix this is to meditate for 25 minutes twice a day and go on a week-long silent retreat, because that's not realistic for people. So it's really about how can you make small changes that will make a big difference, both for you and for your kids. For me, I'm a busy working mom. My meditation practice, the way it looks is I come downstairs. I know I'm not going to forget about my coffee ever, because I love coffee. So I set my coffee to brew and I pay attention to my breathing for 3 to 5 minutes. And when I hear that beep that the coffee's done, that's my signal. So that's how I start my day. I look for ways to integrate it into my commute. I look for ways to integrate mindfulness into my exercise routine. When I'm in the shower, my beauty routine, which is pretty minimal realistically, but even just like the way I put lotion on my face, how to integrate it into a meal, how to have mindful conversations with your kids that kind of get them to think differently, asking them questions like, what mistake did you learn from today? Another question I asked my kids was, who was a good friend to you today? So just trying to get them to think about things a little bit differently, to stimulate different parts of their brain in simple ways. Our kids get in the car every day after school, or they walk in the door, and it's easy to say, do you have homework? Or but how can we just kind of tweak the things we're already doing in little ways that will make a difference for our families.
I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up this wonderful conversation. Kristen, I just want to thank you for doing the work that you're doing, for your work with the book, with the with mindful living, with teaching the schools and the moms and all of these places, and really making a huge dent in this movement. It's been awesome to witness that, and I really want to thank you for that work, and of course for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Hunter, and thanks for the work you're doing too to get all of this information out there. It's awesome. So thanks for everything that you're doing as well.
I love what Kristen says to us about, that whole idea of the ideal from the outside in doesn't work, so we can stop that achievement race a little and really cultivate that resilience from within. Yes, 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 yes. Absolutely. If you have enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and tell me about it. Leave me a voicemail at mindfulmamapodcast.com. There's a link there right in your podcast player to leave a voicemail. Tell me your takeaways from the podcast so that I can help celebrate on the 200th episode. It would mean so much to me if you would. And there's not much time now. You got to do it right away before the time runs out, okay? And I want to let you know that Raising Good Humans is available for pre-sale. So have you pre-ordered your book yet? If you haven't, please go to raisinggoodhumansbook.com and order your copy of Raising Good Humans. You're going to get some awesome book bonuses, and it's just such a super way to support the podcast and get all of this awesome information all in one place. And it is a great, great gift for new parents. If you have any of those in your life, it's a great gift for them. So please go ahead and do so. And thank you. Thank you for listening. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. I appreciate your presence. I appreciate your ears. I appreciate all the wonderful messages that I get from you. Thank you. Thank you. It really fills my heart. So I'm wishing you a beautiful week. I'm wishing you a peaceful week with some less stress, more peace, more resilience. We can do it. We can take those little bitty steps together. Absolutely. All right. Sending all my love to you, my friend. Namaste.